Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Alive. I'm Patina. I'm the host of the show. And first of all, if you were trying to watch our live stream, I apologize. We had some kind of major disruption. So we decided to go ahead and record this, and then we will post it. So you're watching it as a post and not a live stream. But I did see like so many of you were out there commenting, so I'm sorry. We were saying a lot of really good things. But unfortunately, you're not going to get to hear them because we're starting over. But I just want to talk a little bit about my guest tonight. I met John about 6 months ago, I would say, and he was in worship, and I recognized him because he came in with a bandana on, and he also carried in his helmet for his motorcycle. So I'm like, who's this guy? I've never seen him before, especially when he walked into traditional worship. But I started noticing that he was doing like little things around the church and helping people out and cleaning up here and there, just lending a helping hand. And also noticed that some people in my church knew who he was. So he has been here in this congregation before and had popped back in. But there's one thing that I've really noticed about him is that he gives a lot of credit to God and for his life, his experiences in life, he believes have brought him to God and a greater understanding of God. So we want to talk about some of those things tonight. So let us welcome John Campbell to Alive.
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I find it a privilege to be able to talk about God anytime. And I am just always amazed, especially when I look past in my life, how even when times I was oblivious to him, when I didn't truly know him, that he was right there with me. And,
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a really important thing that we're going to talk about, which is your bandana. We already, in the last podcast, we already spilled the beans, didn't we? And then, too bad, too sad. Sorry, guys.
Only one time. That's it. Sorry. Yeah. I've already put it back on.
Yeah. We're in end of story. But no, we will reveal. We'll have a big reveal at the end, talking about why he wears a bandana. I think the first time we started talking to, when I really started interacting with you, was when we were in the choir room and you were going to be singing for Easter. I had heard that you were a singer. And so we started, and then you said, I asked you if you wanted to do a monologue. And I was shocked when you're like, okay. And not only was I shocked because you said okay, but when you did it, it was really good. And so that's when I first went, okay, this guy, you spoke from your heart. It wasn't fake. And that was really refreshing to me. I also see that you have a t-shirt on. Ask me about my story. Thank you, Erica Headland, for designing that. And that's from our last time before last sermon series. And so that's what we're doing tonight, is we're asking you about your story, and we're going to hear about it.
Sure. Yeah. There's nothing more powerful than our story. And when we can show people how God has directed us in our lives, even when we didn't know him, when we can show them that, gives them hope, and it also gives them an avenue to discover God in their own lives. So.
See, which I love that, because you just said, even when we don't know it. And that's one of the things when I was doing the pre-interview with you, is like you were talking a lot about your past and looking back in the rearview mirror going, I can see that what God was doing. Now that I'm looking in I can see God was drawing me to him, which is pretty much your whole story, which is awesome.
Sure.
But before we go any further, I want to remind everyone that if you are on our church's YouTube page, I'd like to ask for you to click subscribe and hit that notification button, or actually subscribe and hit the notification button, because we always have new content. And when you do that, then you'll be the first to know what's going on. And also, super excited that we have a podcast. So all of these are going to be all of the interviews right now are already on podcast, this one included. And so if we have a QR code, you can find our QR code. You can find on any of the platform you like to listen to podcasts. So I go usually to Apple Podcasts. All you have to do is type in Alive ! With Patina, and then you'll be able to find it, because there's a lot of Alive podcasts that it's hard to kind of dig down deep enough unless you put my name in there. So anyway, Let's talk a little bit about you, John. So you are not originally from Florida. Where are you from?
I was born in Portland, Maine.
Okay.
And I do have that Maine accent. I do have to work at it to bring it back out again. I go up there now and they say, "Boy, do you talk funny." And, it used to be when I first came down here, it was, "Boy, you talk funny."
Yes, yes.
So.
Yeah, because I wouldn't have really heard barely I can hear something, but I didn't know what it was. So.
Yeah, well, unless you were parking the car, you might not have
exactly,
picked it up.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're from Maine, which means a beautiful state. Tell us a little bit about how your life began. I mean, I know that you don't remember when you were born, but from your mother's stories, what happened when you were a baby?
Sure. Like I said, God's been in my life since day one. And I was born 6 months a preemie. I was just about 2 pounds. I didn't have all my layers of skin. My mother told me that I was as red as a lobster. My digestive systems and respiratory systems were not fully developed. And essentially what they did at the hospitals after I was born, they wrapped me in a blanket, handed me to my mother, and they said, "Here, take him home." They didn't have prenatal units back then. She said, "Take it home, but don't get too attached. He's not going to make it." Well, from the perseverance of my mother and the grace of God,
there you go.
There we go. And what my mother did is she called around every doctor, every pediatrician that she could think of, trying to get different formulas that would actually stay down long enough that I would get some nourishment. She also was telling me that every once in a while it was like I would forget to breathe. And she said all she had to do, though, was just touch me. And because I didn't have all my layers of skin, evidently it was painful because I'd go right into a wailing cry. But she said she loved hearing that cry. And, so through the grace of God and her perseverance, I beat the odds because the percentage of people of a 6-month preemie living back then was in the single digits for sure. So.
I can't even imagine bringing a baby home that small and just left to my own, and trying to keep the baby alive. That would have been so stressful. So your mother must have been a really amazing person.
Yeah.
Now you said that when you got to elementary school, because you were born a preemie, you had really no immune system. So when you got to school, you were very, very sick.
Right. What I've been told is during the last couple of months of pregnancy, immunities are passed from the mother to the child. And as long as I wasn't in school, it didn't seem to be a problem. Once I hit kindergarten, became a problem. From kindergarten to 2nd grade, my mother tells me I spent more time at home sick than I did at school. In that time period, I had chicken pox, I had old-fashioned measles, I had German measles, I had the mumps, I had whooping cough, and then it all ended in what I call the trifecta, where I started out with scarlet fever, which turned into scarlatina, which gave me mastoiditis. And mastoiditis is what took out my hearing in my left ear. Scarred up my eustachian tube, so I have a hard time even just driving up in the mountains. I'll be in pain because the eustachian tubes are what equalizes the pressure on the backside of the eardrums. Scarred up my left eardrum and fused all the little bones together between the eardrum and the cochlea, which is what actually does the hearing. But I do have some hearing in my left ear, and if you want to know what I hear in my left ear, just put both hands over your ears as tight as you can and talk and try to listen to what's around, and that's what I hear in the left ear. So it's kind of a built-in monitor almost.
It really is, yeah, for those of us who
music.
use the in-ear monitors, and you can,
Sure.
doing that.
And then once every about 4, 5, 6 years, I'll get a bad enough cold that my inner ear will fill with fluid, and I get treated to sounds that I hadn't heard in years. Birds tweeting, cymbal crashing, and whatnot. So, it's kind of a blessing when I get a really, really bad cold.
Well, it's amazing. Well, that's how you look at everything. I've noticed about you. Like, when things that normal people would think are very bad to you, they turn into blessings. I mean, I've heard you tell your story, and so now you were able to avert death as a preemie, and then also you could have died. Every single one of those things that you had.
Sure.
Every one of those diseases that you had. And so now you're still with us. You're in elementary school. You missed a lot of school, but you did well, and you started hanging out with some friends. Give people a little bit of background about your family. Did you have any kind of faith in the family when you were growing up?
Not until after my trifecta. We went to church for about 2 years, from the time I was 7 till I was 9. So I was going to Sunday school. After the 2 years, I kind of know what happened. My mother had a falling out with the church, and of course at the time I had no clue, but shortly after we had left, I remember as a kid listening to my mother on the phone and her saying something to the effect of, well, they could afford to buy her a car, but they couldn't help me with my mortgage. And today I know more than likely somebody donated a car and it got passed on down to somebody that needed it. But my mother obviously didn't understand that. So anyway, she kept sending me to Sunday school. She said I could go, and so I'd get dressed up in my suit, and I would walk towards Sunday school. And there was this parking lot that had these cliffs. I just loved climbing things and climbing cliffs, and so I'm in my suit and seeing these cliffs, and I think I might have went to Sunday school a couple of times when she sent me, but it was very soon that I was climbing the cliffs, and I guess my mother would notice when I come home that my suit was a little dirty.
A little.
And so she stopped making me go, and that was a kind of falling out. So I mean, there was I think a seed probably planted back then, but not one that I was truly aware of.
And you, as far as you've talked about your mother, you said your dad was in the picture until you were in high school. So what was your relationship like with your father?
It's interesting when my brother is 7 years older than I am. And if you hear my brother talk about my father and then you hear me talk about my father, you'd think it was two completely different people. So I'll start off by saying that somewhere along the lines, addiction took a hold of him, which I now understand but didn't at the time. But we'll get into that in a little bit.
Oh, yes.
But so anyway, but God also protected me and saved me from that, because generally my father was an alcoholic, and he wouldn't come home usually until after I was already in bed, and then he was sound asleep and out of it by the time I left for school in the morning. So my interactions with him were few and far between. What interactions I did have with him, he was always drunk, and he was either putting me on his knee telling me war stories, which my mother said never happened, because all he ever really did was in Boston he would load ships with supplies. He never left the States. And but anyway, as drunk, he would tell me war stories. Either that or he was just mad at me for one thing or another. And
so it wasn't a really close relationship. I mean, he didn't really abuse you per se.
Right.
I mean, physically abuse you. But you guys weren't really close because the alcoholism had taken over his life. And then you lost him. How old were you when that happened?
I was 15 when my father died. He died of cancer of the spine. He actually spent 2 years in an institution called Togus, which was a veteran hospital in Maine. But I really didn't get to see him, because he was when we did go and visit, I would usually just wait out in the waiting room. Only one time did he ever ask my mother to bring me in, and by the time she come and got me and brought me back in, he was out of it, because he was on pain meds and just out of it all the time. And
do you feel like from the time he was in the hospital, so 13 to 15, was your mother with him a lot? I mean, were you just kind of on your own a little bit at home, or what was going on during that time?
Actually, Togus was a place that was about an hour and a half to 2 hours away from where we lived in Portland. So, I mean...
He was just there?
He was there all the time, and we would go up every couple of months.
Oh, wow.
And just to go up to see him. And
that had to be hard for your mom, too. I can't imagine.
Yeah,
that was like. So he passes away when you're in high school. You're 15 years old, and you started into some shenanigans, as many do when they're about that age. So what happened when you were in 10th grade, I guess, or the end of the year?
It was 10th grade, towards the end of 10th grade. There was a girl.
No, it's never a girl.
It's never a girl. Tylene. And I liked her. And my best friend Dan and I walked with her. There was a rather large cemetery at the back of the school. And we walked into the cemetery, went to the furthest end of the cemetery, and all of a sudden she whips out a joint. Now, before this, marijuana cigarette, for those of you that don't know what a joint is, just covering my bases. Anyway, so she pulled out this marijuana cigarette. And before this, I had always said, drugs, no, that's stupid. People that do drugs are dumb. They shouldn't be doing drugs. And but I liked Tylene. And I wanted her to like me. Mm-hmm. So I went ahead and I smoked. And then I got involved into the marijuana. And the really interesting thing about this is Dan wouldn't touch it. Dan never did touch it. And yet Tylene started dating Dan.
Right. Isn't it funny how things work?
Yeah. And but anyway, that got me into the subculture. And
what year was this at this point?
So I was 16. I got to do the math. 56, 66.
In the 70s?
So 72, yeah.
Okay.
72. And so anyway, I got into the subculture. There were always kids at the back of the high school that were into drugs. And I met these two guys, Bob and Wayne. Bob was a very charismatic kind of character. He was kind of a cross between Steve Martin and Bobcat Goldthwait. Now, if you don't know who Bobcat Goldthwait is, just Google him and watch some of the stuff. Then you'll get... Matter of fact, Bob was probably more Bobcat Goldthwait than he was Steve Martin, but wild and crazy guy kind of thing. Wayne was a rather large guy, baby face, had a smile that could win anybody over in a heartbeat. And so I got involved with them, and they had their own apartment, and I got it into my head that I would like to move in with them, so I moved out of the house, left home, of course quit high school, and got involved with these guys. Now these guys, because of their character and the way they were, they got into some pretty heavy inner circles.
Mm-hmm. Of drugs,
yeah. Right. And were invited to a lot of parties. Now, the interesting thing is if you remember the character Jim from Taxi,
yes,
or it's like Spicoli from Fast Time at Ridgemont High, or characters like that.
I've never
Bill
seen
and Ted.
any of those movies.
No, I'm sure. And for the first 2 years, from 16 to 18, as long as it didn't involve a needle, I would do any drug that was out there. Mm. But after being invited party after party and meeting guys like Jim, well, what stands out in my mind the biggest is and what actually changed my whole idea of doing the harder drugs was, I remember we were at this party, we're all gathered around this guy. Now, these guys, we called them burnouts, we called them crispy critters because essentially their brains were fried. Mm-hmm. And this guy said something, and it just set everybody laughing. And I vividly remember the look of bewilderment on his face. Like he had no clue why anybody was laughing. But then his expression changed from bewilderment to just absolute joy because he realized people were laughing at him. And it was just something to do about him, and that's all he cared about. And when I saw that, I said, I don't want to be a crispy critter. I don't want to be a burnout.
Don't want your brain to be fried.
Right. So from that point on, I didn't do any of the harder drugs, but I continued to smoke marijuana for quite a number of years.
Your two friends, didn't they get really serious? We were talking about how they became mules, or they would run
Sure.
drugs back and forth, and
Yep.
some really risky activities.
Well, I met another girl.
Yes.
But this one was, had somewhat of a better turnout. But Rita, or Narika, is what her real name, but everybody called her Rita. And we'd been going out for a while, and she convinced me that I probably ought to move out and get my own place. Now, I've always had this idea that I don't want to be like my father. that I want to be a good husband. I want to be a good father. I want to support my family, have a family and support it. And so this kind of fit into that. I'll get my own place, and I thought I might have had a future with Rita. And so I moved out, and we had dated for a while. I was in there for about a year. I was working at a company called Thomas P. Beals Furniture Company, and I was a master cabinet builder. And I like
Which means what?
Yeah, I like telling people that, but all it really means is I was really good at putting erector sets together because all the things were already cut to the right size and whatnot, and all I did was assemble them. Yeah. And I only hit master because I could do so many in a day. But it was still pretty good.
Yeah.
It was a pay increase
you were a master.
and the whole deal. And so anyway, I'm working one day, and then I get a call from Rita. And they pulled me off the line and brought me into the office, and I talked to her, and she says, I'm pregnant. And it was the most joyful day in my life, the most joyful day in my life. And so I'm thinking, great family thing, we'll get married and all of this and that.
Are you like 19 years old-ish or something? Is that how old you are?
Yeah, I was 20. She was 19.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I thought we're set. We're ready. We're ready to go. And but not once did I ever ask her how she felt about it. Not even once. Every time we talked about it, it was I'm saying, "Oh yeah, well we're gonna get married. We'll have the family. We'll make it through life together." And I think it was about 2.5 months after that phone call that I went, after work, I went to her house to pick her up because she still lived at home at the time. And when I got there, she said, well, she's not here. She's in the hospital. She's had a miscarriage. And so, I mean, that was, here I went from one of the best days of my life to just one of the saddest days of my life. And so anyway, that it was what it was. A few weeks after that, I think it was about a month and a half after that, I go to pick her up after work one day, and I would always sit at the kitchen table when be waiting for her to get ready and when I picked her up. And so I'm sitting at the kitchen table, and of course, being nosy, I see there's a bill sitting on the table, and I look at it, and it's a hospital bill. And the hospital bill lists an abortion procedure. Well, that bottomed me out at that point.
Do you think that, which that's devastating, I mean, because you had these really good feelings of wanting to have a family, and maybe because your father, who knows why, it's like all of this. So it was a good sense, a really good goal to have a family and be a good parent. And but it seems like you were replacing or filling that void you had in your soul with this idea of family, which is not bad. That's what's weird about it. It's not a bad thing.
Right.
But like because of the absence of a really solid family, maybe when you were a child, that's what you were trying to have.
Yeah, could very well be. I
mean, that's just, but to sit there, that had to make you feel horrible. Yeah. Did you say anything to her?
No, never did. Just kind of accepted it. And I always thought that her father, because her father never liked me. I'm a long-haired hippie at the time. And I just figured her father left it there for me to see. And so things just kind of spiraled downward from that point on. And
so you broke up with her? So
I broke up with her. Well, actually, before I broke up with her, it was kind of like a double being hit twice. When I found out that she had the abortion, about a month after that, because we still stayed together for about 6 months after that. Okay. But about 2 months, maybe 3 months after I'd found out about the abortion, I happened to meet up with Bob and Wayne, and they invited me to a party. And that was when I found out that after I had moved out, that they had become mules.
Okay.
Yeah, and mules, for those that don't know, mules were people that would, and what they actually did is they would drive to Miami. Remember where I was in Maine? They would drive to Miami, pick up drugs, and bring them back to Maine. Now, being mules, they had to live out in the country, because when you're out in the country, it's harder for anybody to keep track of you, and it's harder to see if anybody's watching you. And Bob was very much a people person, no question. He loved to be around people. So anyway, they invited me out to this party, and we were having a grand old time. And somewhere during the night, Bob, who I still considered to be my best friend at the time, asked me to come into his bedroom. He said he needed to talk with me. And so I went into the bedroom, and he proceeded to tell me how he was depressed, how he didn't like living out in the country, nobody around. He was left alone for hours at a time because he had to stay and watch the product, while the other two guys that lived there were out either delivering or doing whatever they had to do. And just completely downtrodden. And I tried to encourage him. I tried to tell him, well, you can change your life. I mean, look at me. I moved out, and I was still with Rita at the time. And so I did my best to encourage him, and I thought he was encouraged when I had left. So I went home about 11 o'clock the next day. Harry, Wayne, it was Bob and Wayne, but he didn't like the name Wayne, so everybody called him Harry. And so Harry showed up, and he says, I saw you went in and was in Bob's bedroom for a little bit last night. And I said, yeah. He said, yeah, he asked me to come in and talk with him, and he was really depressed, and I told him everything that happened. And he looked at me and said, well, Bob shot himself last night. So between the abortion and the my best friend committing suicide, it just put me into a spiral. Rita and I broke up very shortly after that, and even though I didn't make a conscious decision to do it, I essentially became a hermit for about 8 years. Shut myself off from everybody else. So, the only people I saw were the people that I had to work with at work, and of course my drug dealer.
Your drug dealer, right?
My marijuana supplier.
Yeah.
And that was it. And
so you were working, but you didn't have a social life. Right. You were smoking marijuana every day.
Morning, noon, and night.
Okay. And 8 years.
8 years.
That's a long, long time. So do you think that the marijuana you were trying to, were you trying to just kind of like offset some of your feelings, or did it put you into a stupor, or how? I mean, were you depressed during that time, or what all was going on? Do you even know?
Self-medication.
Yeah.
I mean, to a large extent, that's what it is. And the biggest problem is you don't grow at all.
Yeah.
I mean, you just accept with the way things are, and that's it. But I did, even the day that I first started smoking, when I was with Tylene and I smoked that first joint, I said 10 years. That's it. I said by the time I'm 26, which I wasn't absolutely sure. Matter of fact, I didn't think I'd make it to 26. I truly didn't. Wow. I said, but when I hit 26, I'm going to quit.
So you're 26 now.
When I hit 26, I decided I'm going to quit.
Okay.
And I quit.
For how long?
3 days. I started smoking again, and then I quit again.
Yeah.
Maybe a week. Started again. And I quit again, and the most I made it was 2 weeks.
Wow.
Could not get past the 2 week spot. And I mean, I even remember wanting it so bad at one point that I drove from Portland, Maine down to Boston, which is 150 miles one way. So I drove 300 miles to get myself some weed so that I could have something to smoke. And so anyway, that went on for pretty close to 2 years. And I remember I was just fed up with it. And I vividly remember crying out to God. Probably the only time I can remember in my youth at all crying out to God that I just can't take it anymore. And then when I was about 28, smoking my weed and went to bed one night. I woke up the next morning with the worst sore throat you could possibly imagine. The worst. No symptoms prior, no other symptoms except a sore throat. Felt perfectly fine except a sore throat. I mean, I couldn't eat anything. It hurt to eat ice cream. So I'm just eating soups and whatnot, whatever I can, and there's no way that I could smoke pot. So I rolled my little baggie up and I put it in the freezer because I didn't want it going bad on me. And,
of course not.
So anyway, this went on for almost 3 weeks.
Wow.
So just every day, absolutely the worst sore throat you can absolutely imagine. And went on for almost, like I said, almost 3 weeks. Go to bed one night, wake up the next morning, just absolutely gone. Absolutely gone. No, there was no wind up time, no wind down time.
Boom,
it was
it's
like
done.
boom, it's there, boom, it's gone. And so, hey, okay. So I head over to my freezer. I opened my freezer up, and I take my little bag of weed, drive over to my best friend's house, and I said, "Here you go."
And that was it.
I don't want it, and that was it.
Do you think that God was involved in that at all?
Oh, there's no question. At the time, I didn't have a clue.
Yeah.
At the time,
This is
it
that
was,
rear view mirror thing where you're looking in the back
Yeah.
going, okay, that was totally God.
Yeah, it had to be. It had to be. I mean, just like no wind up. It's just boom, it's there, and then boom, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so unusual.
And no other symptoms. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Felt perfectly fine the whole time. And yeah.
God's like, okay, I'm going to show you. Let me help you out a little bit here, John.
That's
I'm going
right.
to help you out.
You don't know me yet, but you're going to.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about that in United Methodist churches about that prevenient grace, that grace that goes before and draws us to repentance. And like these things that are happening in your life, you weren't a horrible person. You made bad decisions and got into situations that weren't good for you.
Right.
And God is like, hey, John.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I'm sure he put Rita in my life and got me away from Bob and Wayne before, before they became mules. Because if I was still living them when they became mules,
oh my goodness,
I'd have been a mule.
Yeah.
No question. No question.
So now you've got you're done with the smoking pot, and do you start pulling yourself together a little bit, and you're like, didn't you start working in computers, or you were like doing something in chat rooms and different things?
Yeah, always very interested in computers. I had a Commodore 64. It was a computer of the day. And back before the internet was known as the internet, they were just like services out there, and there were services like they called CompuServe, Alta Vista. There was Quantum Link. Just different services where you could get online and you could find information just like you do today. You didn't get online till after 5 o'clock, though, because before 5 o'clock it was just too expensive. So you get on after 5 o'clock. And so anyway, I was on this service called Quantum Link. And I tended to hang around the help room more than anything. I found it to be the most interesting chat room that there was. And I ended up with a lot of times people would get on friends' computers and they say, well, I can't get on this system with my computer, and I would help them as to what they had to do to get onto the system. And the people that were there in the health room evidently saw that, and they decided, well, would you like a job? So I actually went to work for them. Now, Quantum Computer Services also became Apple Link, PC Link. Some of you might remember those names.
I actually
Probably
do.
most of you had never heard of them. But the name that you do know and remember is eventually they combined all those services together into AOL. And so I worked for them for a number of years. And again, this is something that God used. And because I was in that, what's the word I'm looking for? That venue, I liked doing those kinds of things. There was a new service that came up called PlayNet. And I decided I was going to go check out PlayNet. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with how these work, is when you logged into it, you would be put into a general room. Then you would get a list of rooms, and you would pick something that interested you. The rooms were named. And essentially, for most of the time, it's like a 5-second thing. You get in, you see the list of room names, and you click on the one you're interested in, you're out of there. Well, I happened to be on PlayNet in that chat room when this woman showed up online, and I decided to say hi, and she said hi back, and we started talking, still in this general room, and we just got to know each other a little bit better. Again, I'm still living in Maine at the time, and so we started to eventually got to the point where she gave me her phone number, and I would call her and talk to her over the phone, and literally we would talk hours a night. And eventually we got to the point where it's like, well, we need to get together. We need to, possibly get married. It was possibly still at that point. And we started discussing it, and it was like, well, let's see, should we live in Maine or should we live in Florida? And
that's a no-brainer.
It was a no-brainer. And so I flew down here to Florida to actually meet her, and we got along okay. And I flew back, and then so I decided to move down here. Now, on my move down here, I had an '85 Chevy van. And I'm driving down Interstate 95, and I'm behind this car carrier. And the car carrier is empty. And all of a sudden, I noticed something come off the car carrier, bounce off the ground, and I swerved, and the thing took out my driver's side mirror. If I hadn't swerved, it would have come straight through the windshield. I went back and picked it up, and it was about, probably 2 foot by 2 foot. Big hunk of steel, metal grate, evidently something that the cars went up over, and probably weighed about 40, 50 pounds. So that could have easily killed me.
Yes.
Thank you, Lord.
Yes, exactly. To God be the glory.
Yeah. So the mirror I could deal with.
So you're down here now. So you end up moving here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys end up falling in love, getting married, living here. Were you living here in Oviedo?
Yes.
Okay. So that's how you landed here in Oviedo.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'm going to kind of fast forward this a little bit. You had a son, you had a baby, and so you guys are doing great. I know you said that you started getting into Cub Scouts with your son. And one of the things that you said to me that kind of is a little bit of a window into you said you thought you were happy, but you really weren't happy.
Right.
During that time. Explain what happened and what that means.
Everything went along as far as I thought okay, until my son brought home a flyer from school. And it was a flyer for Cub Scouts. Now he's second grade, 7 years old. And this is an age where they start playing more with their friends or playing their games or whatever they're doing. They're spending less time with mom or dad. And I decided, well, Cub Scouts, he was obviously he was somewhat interested in it because he brought me the flyer. And I thought this was a good thing that we could interact with. And so I became involved in Cub Scouts. And became involved in Cub Scouts. Started out, actually, I volunteered right away as an assistant den leader. Very quickly became den leader. not too long after that, became den leader and assistant cub master. Then the next year, I actually became cub master. Then I got involved at a district level. So I was cub master. I was also committee chair for the Cub Scout pack. So I was doing three. I was doing den leader, cub master, and committee chair. Oh, geez. And so I was doing all three of those things. Plus, I got involved at the district levels and got involved in training, Cub Scout leader training.
So like super dad.
Yeah, I was just going full tilt bozo. Now, one thing as my cub master role, one of my jobs was to find places for dens to meet, and I was going to every place I could possibly imagine to try to get rooms. I was going to churches, bowling alleys, the municipal center here in Oviedo, just everywhere I could think of, and all I kept getting, one after another, was, well, okay, are you a member here? Does anybody in your pack a member here? No, I don't think so. We can give you a room, but it's $75 a night plus keying fees or whatever it was. So essentially, just time after time and time again, just getting answers that just pushing me off to one side. So anyway, I finally walked into FUMCO, First United Methodist Church of Oviedo. And I go up to the front desk, and Gail was the administrator at the time. And I give her my whole spiel. And, of course, I'm expecting to get the same answer that I get every place else. And Gail looks at me, and she goes, well, how many rooms do you need and how many days? And my jaw just dropped. The welcoming nature of this church at the time. And just... 3 rooms and a couple of days. That's it. And so we got signed up. Now, also in Cub Scouting, they do have what they call a God in Me badge. And when we got to that point, I thought, well, it'd really be good for Brian to have a belief in God, because I believed in God. Through my teen years, it was an agnostic stage, but pretty much I believed in God the whole time. I cried out to him in my 20s. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I decided, well, he should start going to Sunday school. And, of course, you have to lead by example. So I said, well, I can't just drop him off at Sunday school. So I don't need church, but I'll go just as an example for him. Little did I know how much I needed church. Mm-hmm. And I soon found out that, I needed church much more than he did.
So let me just kind of, because I want to talk about that for a minute before we get to that point. Because another thing, which I'm going to kind of skip over it, but just mention that you also talked about going to the pumpkin patch when they used to have it over on Redbud.
Sure,
met some people there that were from this church that were super generous and kind. And so you had 2 hospitality experiences that were really, really good, that drew you in to this congregation. I just want to point it out because it shows me how important hospitality is.
Oh, sure.
It's the people in hospitality not being just the person greeting at a door. The hospitality of people and the kindness and generosity and love and we hear you, you're important to us. Yes, that drew you in to this place. And what you said, I think, is really important, that you believed in God, but the presence of the Lord in your life, you hadn't taken that step yet.
Oh, God!
To where it was personal.
Yeah, he didn't have time for me. Come on, God's got much more important things to go. Than me. And plus, you're saying, which doesn't happen very often anymore in a lot of places, which is, well, I'm not just going to drop my son off and leave. That happens a lot. Right. A lot of people decide that that's what but you decided, you know what, I'm going to be all in. If my son is all in, I'm all in. So right. You decided to start coming to church. And how long did you come to church before you had some kind of
encounter?
Yeah, my encounter. Probably just just about a year. 'Cause was it my first cantata? No, I think it was my second Easter cantata. So about a year and a half, I had been coming to church, and I was sitting in the Easter cantata, and they were doing a song called Via Dolorosa.
The Road of Suffering.
The Road of Suffering. That's, and of course, for those that don't know, that's when Jesus was forced to carry the cross down the streets for him to be nailed on and sacrificed on. And I remember sitting there thinking about it. And of course, this was Palm Sunday. So actually, Via Dolorosa was the last song in the service. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks. What Jesus did for me. I knew he did it for you, did it for everyone else. But he did it for me.
Amen.
And I'm certainly not worthy. There's no question about that. But he died on that cross for me. He suffered what he suffered for me. He went through all the abuse, the humiliation, the beatings, the spat upon. And that's what for me, it became personal.
So you're in church. You have this moment with Jesus. How did that impact your life? Like, what happened after that?
Well, first off, I blubbered like a baby for the rest of that service. Didn't stop. Couldn't stop. And when it became personal is when I realized that he had always been there with me.
Yes.
And that there was nothing better than I can do ever than let other people know that and feel that and experience that. And essentially that's where it took me in life, is to serve. And I know the only way I can serve him is by serving his people. And the best way to serve his people is to show them who God is, who Jesus is. So.
Now, we know that many times when you had that, you said you knew that God had been with you all along and that he had been there, but all of a sudden there's this awareness of it and that he was with you at that moment. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that your life was instantly perfect.
No.
And that John wore a white robe everywhere he went,
right,
and was completely perfect in every aspect, right?
Right.
So you had to still deal with the human side of you. You had the Spirit of the Lord in you, but you were still in this world and still trying to figure things out.
Right.
But how were you different in life? Like you were talking about serving, did anything change, or did you just continue your life as it was, or what happened?
I tried to continue my life as it was. I was pretty heavily involved in scouting, but then I also became involved in church because, hey, at this point, I gotta know more. And I'm going to Wednesday night classes. I'm taking I took Disciple 1, I took Disciple 2, I took Disciple 3.
Those are big classes. That's impressive.
Yeah. Those nowadays they're 16-week classes.
Yeah.
Back then they were 32-week classes.
Oh, they're exactly, yeah.
Good hour and a half every night of reading and writing in the book. And best time I ever spent, though, no question.
Yeah.
No question. And so got more and more involved in church. And one of the interesting things also within church, and another way that God prepared me to keep me in church, was that about 2 years before I started coming to church, just out of the blue, I got this inspiration I want to learn how to sing better. And before that, it was always don't quit your day job kind of thing. And so I got the inspiration to start learning how to sing. So I start learning how to sing. And I remember the first time anybody ever made a comment that I sang pretty well. It was a Guess Who song. Which was an Indian ballad, went sort of like, on the banks of the river stood Running Bear, young Indian brave, on the other, da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
It was a Romeo and Juliet kind of song, tragedy song. And so anyway, here I come to church, and I'm getting involved, and there was a Sunday night service over in the historic sanctuary. The new sanctuary didn't even exist. Sunday night service, and at that Sunday night service, it was pretty much just praise and worship the whole time. And I was in that worship service, and I was singing, and at the time it was Pastor Steve Miller was the pastor here, and his wife Marcy was the music leader. And I'm singing away, and little beknownst to me, this was probably the third or fourth time that I had been to this service, and evidently somebody said something to Martha, and all of a sudden at the end of the service, she comes up to me, she goes, "You need to be in the choir." And that was really what got me into the smaller groups in the church,
yes.
Other than the classes. So that was just another way, because the classes, you I don't know, it's a different experience singing in church.
Yeah.
And it was shortly after that I became, I remember Chuck Pratt, who was audio video director at the time. I used to help him a lot on how to set up and fix the system and whatnot whenever they had problems. And just one day he says, "How would you like to be audio video director?" And I was like, okay. Sure.
So you went, just in summary here, you went from almost dying as a baby, almost dying as a child, your father dying at 15, you're getting into the wrong crowd, doing drugs, quitting high school, moving in, living with drug dealers, taking a lot of drugs, taking all kinds of stuff, smoking weed. Actually, I think even you said you were homeless for a while, living out of your truck. We didn't even talk about that. All of those things, and not to mention all the other things that happened in your life. And now you're taking Bible classes. You're, a guy working at a church in AV, so you had a major, all of a sudden you didn't even, you could see a church on a corner. It doesn't mean anything to you really. Mm-hmm. And now you're part of that, the body of Christ.
Amen.
And it's amazing how God can take these broken lives and form them into something new. I was thinking, and I want you to talk, because I'm just going to ask a couple more things. We went to training, because we held a training here the other day, Harbor Hope International. And if you guys don't know this, if you're watching this video, they are on the front lines of fighting human trafficking, specifically sex trafficking. And so they did this amazing training here this weekend. And so John came. John, you were the only man in the room. But I love that about you, because you're just like, I, feel like that. So tell the listeners and the audience why you went to that training.
If there's one thing that I've learned since my relationship got personal, is that if I am uncomfortable with something, I'm probably being called to it.
Thank you. That's a great way to describe it. Absolutely.
Yeah, because when it gets on when it gets on my mind, but then it just keeps pegging away at you. Mm-hmm. because God wants us to grow. He wants us to be better people. And the only way we're going to do that is if we get out of our comfort zones.
That's right.
And we just push on forward and sit amongst a bunch of women from a male perspective and go through training, which is really not all that comfortable for you.
Right.
And yeah, so I mean, it just had been gnawing away at me, and I said, "Okay, Lord, this is what you want me to do.
Here I am, Lord, send me."
That's it.
And that's what I see that in you, and I see you doing that. And when I saw you there, I was like, you know what? That's pretty awesome, because a lot of people think that the fight against human trafficking is only appropriate for women, but as they said, they need men as well.
Right.
So I think that's amazing that you did that, and getting out of your comfort zone, not worrying about what your friends are doing, what other people think about you, just getting in. That seems to be your kind of general personality anyway. Just like, speaking of that, we're not letting this go.
Okay.
I need to know why you have a bandana. It probably means nothing. You're just turning it into a big deal. I need to know.
Well, first off, no, I've never really cared what other people thought, and that actually probably comes from my hippie days back in the '70s in Maine, because as a hippie, I was an outcast in the '70s in Maine.
Yeah.
So I really didn't care, and the only one that I truly care about what he thinks is the only one that really matters.
Yes.
And so anyway, yeah, and. Yeah, so I do wear a bandana. Now, what I like to tell people when they ask me about the bandana, I'll tell them, well, you know how God counts every hair on your head? Well, I'm proud to say that over the years, I have lightened his load. And that is to some extent why I wear it, because during the day, my hair I'm not bald, but it's thin enough that I will actually get sunburned on my scalp. And I used to wear a hat, but then the brim gets all in the way. And then when you try to wear a headband with a hat, it's just ridiculous. And so the bandana was the best thing for how I work, because essentially when the sweat comes in, it just trails down the back. It gets wicked away. And so that's how I started wearing a bandana.
Okay.
But
there's more to the story.
There's more to the story.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to show you what's under the bandana.
I'm very scared.
Okay.
I don't know if I want to see.
Are you ready for this? Are you sure? I'm not so sure.
That's not right. That is not right at all.
Okay, in actual fact.
Actual fact.
Yeah. There's a bandage under there.
Okay.
I have a skin ulcer. I've had it for about 3 years. It's not healing. The only way to get rid of it is to chop it out. Haven't been able to afford to do that.
Okay.
But this year, the government declares me officially old, and health care insurance becomes affordable.
Yeah. Hallelujah.
So probably sometime soon. Although, quite frankly, in the last week and a half or so, it looks like it's shrinking. It's been the same size the whole time since the day it started. Yeah. And if I let it dry out, it just looks like I've banged my head. But any kind of rubbing against it causes it to bleed again.
So it's not like a basal cell carcinoma or something like that? Or
No, it's not cancerous.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's just an ulcer.
Yeah.
Well, look at that. Yeah, I wonder if anybody was going to, if we had done this live stream like we intended, if they would have said he has a huge skin ulcer.
It's about the size of a pecan. It's about the size of
his whole head.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Oh, no, that's awesome, though. Okay.
Well, that's it.
Well,
yeah. And I spent a half hour trying to fit these on
with one
another.
That was good. So I have a question. So what is the difference between a bandana and a do-rag?
There is no difference.
How do you spell do-rag?
Well, although a bandana can be just a square,
yes,
not actually a full head covering. It can be just a
just the thing around.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And a do-rag is really what the bikers call it. It's a
okay.
do-rag, so.
I just want to make sure I'm saying the right thing, because I don't know any of that. So, well, John, is there anything you want to say in closing to anybody listening, any closing words or anything that came into your mind that you want to share?
Okay, I'm going to say this. Oh, it's not live now, so you can edit it out if you need to.
Yes.
Get off your butt.
We're not editing that out. That's totally in. Yeah.
Because if you're not doing something that's uncomfortable, you're probably not doing what God wants you to do. So get out there. Do something.
Get out there and do something.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, listen, I just want to thank all of you for joining us in this interview, and I pray that that God spoke to you as you were listening to John's incredible story, and may God bless you, and may you do exactly what John said, and get off your butt and listen to God and do something incredible for the kingdom. Have an awesome night.
Amen.